Hello there. Welcome to whatever we're calling this show. Hello, dear viewers. Welcome back to SiDEQUEST. Today we have a topic I've found quite interesting for the longest time, a time period which has been more or less shrouded in mystery, except for the very, very end of it. I am referring to the new Sith Wars. So do you guys... I've touched upon this in previous episodes. Do you guys have any recalling of what that is?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Okay, so the new Sith Wars were the time period basically from circa 2000 to 1000 BBY, so an entire millennium, which actually happens to explain some of the weird technological quirks in Star Wars media. Because, for example, when Knights of the Old Republic came out, a criticism some people had, like, with the setting was like, wait, this is all the technology is just like, 4,000 years later. Like, what's the deal with that? There's lightsabers, there's big warships, whatever. And from a quick glance, that would be accurate. When you go under the hood, as so to speak, there are a lot of changes to the technology. However, it should also be noted that there was actually a Dark Ages equivalent, basically, where a lot of technology was lost. And as it turns out, the time period of the new Sith Wars is also referred to as the Republic Dark Age. There's a...
So what happens to get to that point? Like, when does our Republic basically, fall apart? And I've got an interesting theory, because we were talking a couple episodes ago about the end of our Sith Empire that's in the game. And I think it's already over. Like, it's already ended. And I can kind of give theory to that, but so what led to this Dark Ages then? What's the set of events that predate that or prelude that?
Right, so previously the Republic had more or less an entire millennium of peace ish, sort of, but then from about 3000 to 2000 BBY. But basically, one Jedi and an Umbaran, unless I'm mistaken, broke away from the Order, started researching culty Sith stuff, as one does, came back as Darth Ruin, he called himself, and began an order of the new Sith, as he called them. Surprise, surprise! Waged war on the Republic. Wow, who would have expected that from a Sith? And so, over that period of 1,000 years, it basically ended up being so brutal, supplies stretched so thin and whatever, that worlds basically ended up being like cut off. Interplanetary trade was so disrupted that a lot of worlds were basically lost. Technology was lost, because without the infrastructure of that galactic society that people had, it's like, there's because assume previously some I don't know, let's say some planet, they had they had a factory to make blasters or something. That factory gets bombarded by the Sith or something. However, with interruptions, with communications so interrupted, those blueprints for those blasters weren't stored on world. They were on the holonet or whatever. And as such, they can't rebuild. So it's like, oh, we're getting invaded. What do we do? Well, they end up basically having to use spears and swords and whatever, like using ancient technology. So basically, yes, by the very end of that war, you see, I'll post, I'll put it up on screen right now. You see, in the very final battle of war, the 7th Battle of Rusan, there are soldiers with lightsabers and blasters and, high-tech body armor fighting alongside guys in rags and spears. It's very... It makes for a fascinating aesthetic, I think. There's just an enormous disparity in terms of technological level. Let's see. And another example of lost technology is interdiction fields. So, in KOTOR, there's, the Leviathan, Darth Malak's flagship that can interdict. For those who don't know, interdiction means creating a gravity well that interrupts, that messes with hyperdrive, so they can't go into hyperspace. So basically traps ships, preventing them from going FTL. So that was something people had said, like, wait, why is there all this this plot points in these books about, the Galactic Empire is researching interdiction fields? Didn't they have that like 4,000 years prior? Nope, that was an example of a lost technology. Something else of interest in this time period was the Jedi really went along with the Jedi Knight part of their name, because they ended up becoming Jedi Lords, even. Like they ended up they ended up as like the leaders of like fiefdoms, basically, like sectors of the like they were appointed leaders like during that crisis and whatever, and basically ended up having knightly lineages. Like
who was running the Republic at this point? That just doesn't sound like a popular opinion kind of way of going about things.
Well, that's the thing. They were cut off, basically. They were on their own. Like the Republic was stretched so thin, and like some sources say like the Republic didn't really exist outside of the core, basically, by that point. The Republic proper, it couldn't... The office of the Supreme Chancellor could not institute any laws that would take effect outside of the core, really.
Right. So it would be up to basically localized martial law in order to get stuff.
And and so like the Jedi who went off to go help, ended up like basically trapped or there, and ended up being. It's like, hey, you're king now. Cool. Okay. I'm not comfortable.
Is there a lot of Is there a lot of content written about this time period, or not very much?
That's the thing. There really isn't, because this is all from like source books and like. Things talking about, things were like this back then, with the exception of the Darth Bane novels and the Knight Errant comics and book. But because as I alluded to at the beginning, that's all at the very, very end of the conflict. So how that goes about
1,000 years to that.
Sorry? Yeah, about 1,000 years before the Battle of Yavin.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what I'm saying. That's 1,000 years of conflict leading up to basically, where everything's deteriorated at the point that you're talking about. That's a ton that you could explore. And I mean, of course, even one good story could take place in 3 days. So 1,000 years and,
No,
all the
exactly.
different.
I've gone on my channel and others about how it's such an underexplored time period. But let me give some other interesting tidbits. There was, I think, about 300 years into the conflict, there was one Sith warlord, simply called the Dark Underlord, who was rumored to be like the reincarnation of Zendor, like the first Jedi, like heretic or like dark side of sorts. And so to assault his fortress, the Jedi in charge of that, Master Murtagh, actually hired the Mandalorians to aid them. So yes, Jedi and Mandos fighting side by side against the Sith.
Well, that doesn't shock me at all, because I mean, our story's fraught in our own time period, and then of course everything that BioWare's written already. That's all just fraught.
Well, no, this long predates anything from SiDEQUEST. This was
whoa. What
was written before
SiDEQUEST,
not in universe chronologically.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I could see why my phrasing would have been confusing.
Well, I mean, I was about to say you just broke it. Like the CPU is fried, and like there's smoke coming out of my ears, and it's like, what?
But right. So I guess I might as well go into the very end of the conflict. Basically, everything was spread super thin. And it wasn't just the Republic that was in bad shape. It was they called themselves, by that point, they had renamed themselves the Brotherhood of the Sith. So they were led by a charismatic, if somewhat incompetent, Lord Khan. Everything I'm about to say is from, or it just did say, is from the Darth Bane novels. So he, there was the Brotherhood of the Sith, and they were a lot more, I guess, similar to the Sith of the SWTOR era, in which there were a lot of them running around, but not necessarily all of them super strong in the Force. Basically find a Force sensitive, you're shipped off to Korriban. And as such, Bane spent a lot of time contemplating, the state of affairs then, and studying Darth Revan's holocron, and that was when he came up with the Rule of Two, of course, because I can't recall if I talked about this before, but his philosophy more or less boiled down to, and I quote, or something along the lines of, he said that the Force is similar to venom. Pour it into enough vessels, and it will cause mild irritation. Pour all the vessels back into one or two cups, and you have enough power to stop a great dragon's heart, or something like that. So he thought, basically dark side wasn't concentrated enough, and as such he orchestrated the Sith's downfall at Ruusan. So Ruusan is a planet familiar to anyone who's played the Dark Forces games, or rather the second one. All this stuff with Kyle Katarn. He basically tricked Lord Khan and his minions into performing an ancient Sith ritual called a thought bomb that Bane said would just annihilate all their enemies. Little did he know it would annihilate both of them. So, and basically, their spirits were trapped there for the next 1,000 years until Kal-Katarn freed them all to, go the Force. But and Bane found one survivor, named Darth Izana, and that's how the Rule of Two began. Now, on the Republic side, they were like, "Oh, the Sith are gone. Sweet, let's go." So they were finally able to start rebuilding, and started reconnecting all the lost worlds, getting the Republic back to being the Republic. Following Ruusan, the Supreme Chancellor of the time enacted what were called the Ruusan Reformations, which basically a massive restructuring of everything, of the entire government, basically. So even that's why in The Phantom Menace there is no and the first half of Attack of the Clones, there is no Republic military. With the Sith gone, they said, okay, yeah, we're just disbanding the military. He changed, and basically, gave a lot more powers to the Senate, put the Jedi in charge of maintaining the peace alongside the volunteer judicial forces. You see those guys, Phantom Menace too, actually. Not a proper military. And so all this little last bit is actually a retcon of sorts to fix an inconsistency within the films. So, in A New Hope, remember, Obi-Wan said, "For over 1,000 generations, the Jedi Knights were guardians of peace in the Old Republic." Whereas, in Attack of the Clones, Palpatine says, "I will not let this republic which has stood for 1,000 years collapse," or something like that. So which is it? 1,000 years or generations?
Now, okay.
Because 1,000 generations is about 25,000 years.
Well, that's what he's saying. He's saying the Jedi have been around, not a string of unbroken, control or power.
Remember, he said peace in the Old Republic. So within the movies, there's conflicting claims of whether it was 1,000 generations or years. However, this whole Ruusan Reformations thing, it was to explain. So yes, the Republic itself, the institution called the Republic, it's been around for 25,000 years, but in its current form, the last 1,000. Clever writers.
I see. That does. It's like a puzzle piece. It just goes snap.
Bingo.
Well, I really want to do another episode on this one because you've already touched on so many, and I didn't have my pen out and was jotting down answers to each one of them. But I got some cool stuff to go with it. I did want to say that I think that's kind of interesting. The decline of civilization and technology, and of course infrastructure, and that's the problem that the Mandalorians had back during the First Crusades. Is that instead of basically setting up governments to take care of these places that they would conquer, they would just leave, and they wouldn't have any kind of way to basically supply their empire. And Cassius Fett saw that as a huge problem. So in the Neo-Crusades, when all that stuff was going on, he strived very hard that each planet that they would conquer, that they would set it up with a government, and you'd be able to use the factories and stuff like that. And they would do entire missions where you wouldn't, bombard the planet specifically because you wanted to get the resources from it. And I think that's kind of cool.
Honestly, that is sadly about all the lore we have on the new Sith. Well, actually, no. There is one more somewhat major event. There was a Belia Darzu was a Sith Lord who actually who had a technique called Mekuderu, which transformed organic matter into like robots. But she basically created a zombie robot army. I'll put an image on screen, but yes, unfortunately, besides that, that's all we know about it. And yeah, I honestly before, well, okay, had I had the knowledge I do now prior to SaToR coming out, I would have said this probably would have been the most interesting time period to put an MMO in. But alas. So we're running low on time. Theogek, do you have your usual segment now of the question out of nowhere?
Yes, I do actually, and it's a very good segment again today. Looking at the timelines that I've looked at in the past and trying to understand them and place events, I too questioned the whole, there's a Jedi sword 1,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago, and now there's a Jedi sword. I mean, why was this considered so far in the past, and yet it looked so like the present? And I understand part of that was planned, but the other part of it left me wondering. In these past few new Sith episodes we've talked about has really enlightened me, so I want to thank you for that. So the question for today is, let's go back to weapons making, and let's talk about lightsabers for a minute. And in the lightsabers, the movies, I can't quote what titles right now, but we've seen Jedis take their crystals out and do things with them, or place their hand over where the crystal sits and does things. Then they talk about tuning their crystals and tuning the crystal and themselves to the Force to be one. And I was wondering what in tuning are they making philosophical changes, or are they making actual alchemy changes to the stone, to the crystal itself? Well, what does it mean to tune a crystal, I guess, is the big question.
Well, that never occurs in the movies. The only lightsaber construction we see is a deleted scene from Return of the Jedi. But as to your question, that's
well, it's referenced because Vader says you completed your training.
Yeah,
and you constructed that. So that's my question. What's different between when Luke had before and now he's completed his training? And how does he know that how does he make a better saber?
Well, that's a story all its own. Remember, he lost the saber he had before, aka Anakin's saber, the one Obi-Wan had given to him, on Cloud City when he got his arm chopped off. But yeah, as for how he constructed that, in between, because there's about a year between Empire and Jedi, so not long after that, during the events of the Shadows of the Empire multimedia thing, he goes back to Tatooine, to Obi-Wan's house, and in a lockbox he finds like the instructions and how to basically components and instructions and like meditative like how to focus yourself in order to align, because the thing about lightsaber construction is it's every attempt to mass produce them has failed because they require a force sensitive, like that level of precision in telekinesis to like hold all the components together and align them perfectly, which apparently isn't able to be done by a machine in Star Wars for some reason, but all right. But as for tuning the crystal, it's crystals are an interesting subject. In under ideal circumstances, the Jedi Padawan, or soon-to-be Padawans, go to Ilum or the Ossa system or otherwise, and basically, yeah, like they meditate there until they find a crystal calling out to them. They're like paired with a kind of like some Harry Potter type. Oh, the wand/crystal chooses its wielder or whatever. And as such, it's like that. But as to alterations to the crystal itself, I don't believe there's much on that, except in the new canon, as opposed to Legends, where the Sith mostly used synthetic lightsaber crystals. The Sith, to create their red blades, take a crystal and more or less torture it, even though it's not alive, but it sort of is, but it isn't, but it is, but it isn't, and in a process they call quote unquote crystal bleeding, and which is an interesting concept, I suppose. So yeah, in terms of crystal alteration, that's the only thing I can think of, but lightsabers are not my lore specialty. But
we should do a little research, each one of us, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about lightsabers either next time or we'll hit it up on it.
I concur. Yeah, no, knowing the, I still can't get my head around the 7 forms. What are they? Shicho, Ataru, Makashi, Jemso, something Juyo Vapa. Yeah, whatever. I can't remember. Regardless, we are.
Wait, what? Talking about different forms of lightsaber combat,
yes.
Or your style.
Yes, massive shout out to Gensarai 1, Antoine Bandelet, all those guys who have their Versus series go on to their super deep analysis of lightsaber forms and whatever. But so go watch them. But alas, we are quite over time. So thank you, dear viewer, as always, and may the Force be with you always.